Picture this. You're conducting routine scientific research, mapping caves with cutting-edge technology, when suddenly your scanner detects something that shouldn't be there. It's not rock, it's not mineral, it's oxidized metal in a cavity no one has explored in decades. What started as a geological research project in the Cave of Silence, located in the Asturian mountains of northern Spain, a region similar in terrain to the Appalachians, became the most disturbing discovery of the 21st century in the world of spelunking. On November 4, 2021, a team of geologists from the University of Oviedo found something that would chill anyone to the bone: a Nikon FM2 camera, perfectly preserved in a hermetic bag with an intact roll of film. When they developed the photographs, 3 smiling faces appeared, dated March 15, 1994. But here's where it gets strange. The most bone-chilling part wasn't the photos themselves. It was the last image on the roll, a blurry photograph taken in complete darkness, where you can barely make out a bloodied hand carving something into the cave wall with a knife. The pristine nature of this karst formation, with its millennial stalactites and crystal galleries, contrasted brutally with the human tragedy that had remained hidden for 27 years. This is the true story of Michael Rodriguez, 28 years old, Karen Mitchell, 24 years old, and David Henderson, 31 years old, 3 explorers whose disappearance became one of Spain's most anguishing mysteries. Make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more cases like this, and hit that notification bell. Let me know in the comments what country you're watching from. Michael Rodriguez was the soul of the group. At 28 years old in 1994, he worked as a telecommunications engineer for Telefonica, Spain's equivalent of AT&T, and had dedicated the last 8 years of his life to caving. His gear was unmistakable. He always wore a bright yellow Petzl helmet that his girlfriend Teresa had given him for his 27th birthday. His navy blue mammoth technical pants and red North Face vest made him easily identifiable in the depths. Michael was the eldest of 3 brothers, and the only one who had decided to stay in Asturias to care for his aging parents. The last photograph of him was taken by his mother, Maria, on Sunday, March 13, 1994, during their family dinner. In it, Michael appears smiling, holding his 2-year-old niece, completely unaware it would be the last time his family would see him alive. Karen Mitchell, the youngest of the group at 24, was a marine biologist fresh out of the University of Santiago de Compostela. This was going to be her first major spelunking expedition. Karen always wore an olive-green Cordura exploration suit with patches from different caves she'd visited as a beginner. Her Petzl ecrin helmet was hot pink, a detail her companions always remembered fondly because she said they'd never lose sight of her in the darkness. She was an only child, and her parents, Anthony and Rose, had expressed concern about this expedition. The last letter Karen wrote to her mother, dated March 14, 1994, read, "Mom, don't worry. Michael and David are experts. They'll take good care of me. When I get back Sunday, I'll tell you all about the wonders underground. Love you so much." David Henderson, 31, was the veteran of the group, a geology teacher at Cangas de Onís High School. Think of it as a small mountain town like Boone, North Carolina. He had explored more than 200 caves throughout Europe. His equipment was meticulously organized. Gray Singing Rock technical coveralls with orange reflective strips, Scarpa SL3 boots he'd bought on his last trip to Italy, and a black Petzl duo helmet with a powerful headlamp he'd modified himself to extend battery life. David had been married to Elena for 3 years, and they had an 18-month-old son named Paul. The last voice recording of David is a message on their home answering machine, left the morning of March 15th. "Elena, honey, we're heading out to the cave now. Weather's perfect. Give Paul a kiss from Daddy. I'll be back Sunday afternoon. Make that stew I love so much. I'll be hungry. Love you." The 3 were members of the Asturian speleological club Tito Bustillo and had planned this expedition for months. Their goal was to explore and map an undocumented section of the Cave of Silence, located in the Picos de Europa Massif. Imagine terrain like the Rocky Mountains, but older and more weathered. They'd informed the club the expedition would last 3 days, from March 15th to 17th, 1994. They carried provisions for 5 days as a precaution, radio communication equipment, and all the technical gear necessary for safe exploration. The last official record of their presence was signing the logbook at the Eagle Mountain Refuge at 6:47 a.m. on March 15, 1994. March 15, 1994 dawned with unusually clear skies for that time of year in Asturias. The temperature was 44 degrees Fahrenheit at 6 a.m. when Michael, Karen, and David woke up at the Eagle Mountain Refuge. Weather records indicate it was one of the driest, clearest days of that entire month. Ideal conditions for spelunking. At 6:30, the three had breakfast: coffee with milk, toast with butter and jam, and orange juice. As Maria, the refuge keeper, would later recall, Karen seemed especially excited, taking photographs of everything with her Nikon camera while David meticulously checked the equipment for the 3rd time. At 7:15, after signing the logbook, they began the 45-minute hike to the Cave of Silence entrance. The trail, well marked and known to locals, winds through a forest of beech and oak trees. According to later testimony from a local shepherd, Ramon Garcia, he saw them pass around 7:45, walking animatedly and waving. They were singing, Ramon would recall years later. They looked like students on a field trip, not explorers heading to their deaths. At exactly 8 Kang, according to the record David left written in his waterproof notebook, they reached the cave entrance. The mouth of the Cave of Silence is an oval opening approximately 10 feet high by 6.5 feet wide, partially hidden by ferns and brambles. David noted, "Eta, main entrance. Optimal conditions. Outside temp 48 degrees. No wind. Beginning descent." At 8:15, they established radio contact with the refuge, confirming their entry. Maria, the keeper, clearly remembers Michael's words. "This is Team Tito Bustillo. We've entered without problems. The cave is dry. We'll maintain contact every 2 hours as agreed. Over and out." The first section of the cave is relatively straightforward, a descending gallery of about 100 feet, with good hand and foot holds. At 8:45, according to David's notes, they reached the first major chamber, known as the Cathedral, for its vaulted ceiling nearly 50 feet high. Karen took several photographs here, amazed by the stalactite formations. In one of these photos, recovered later, you can see Michael and David posing next to a calcite column over 10 feet tall, smiling broadly. At 9:30, they descended Echo Well, a vertical shaft of 40 feet requiring rappelling technique. This was a known and well-documented point of the cave. David noted, 9:35. All down without incident. Karen handling the rope like a pro, continuing toward West Gallery. At 10:30, following protocol, Michael attempted to establish radio contact with the refugee, but the signal was weak. They only managed to transmit "all good, continuing west" before communication cut out. This wasn't unusual. Limestone rock significantly interferes with radio signals. At 10:30, according to David's last legible notes, they reached the point where the known cave ended. Here began their true objective, exploring a fissure David had noticed on a previous expedition but had never investigated. The fissure, barely 24 inches wide, appeared to open into a larger gallery. 10:30, entry to Virgin Zone, narrow fissure but passable, can hear water running below. Karen going first as she's smallest. At 11:15, Karen managed to pass through the fissure and verbally reported to her companions, as later deduced from marks and equipment found, that there was an enormous chamber on the other side with an underground lake. All three passed through, amazed by the discovery. The recovered photographs show a spectacular cavern, with calcite crystals gleaming under their headlamp lights and a crystalline lake of impossible blue. At noon, when they should have made their second radio contact, there was no communication. At the refuge, Maria wasn't initially alarmed. It was common to lose signal in the depths. However, at 2:00 p.m., when there was still no contact, she began to worry. At 4:00 p.m., with no news from the team, Maria contacted the Speleological Club and the Civil Guard, Spain's federal police force, similar to the FBI. At 6:00 p.m., when the sun was beginning to set and the team hadn't emerged or established contact, the alert was officially declared. The last temporal record found was a photo in Karen's camera, taken at 1:47 p.m., showing Michael and David examining what appears to be a narrow passage at the back of the large chamber. The next photo, number 36 and last on the roll, is the blurry image of the bloodied hand. The search operation officially began at 7:30 p.m. on March 15, 1994, when a first rescue team from the Asturian Speleological Club entered the Cave of Silence. Led by Fernando Alvarez, club president and David's personal friend, 6 experienced spelunkers descended following the known route. At 9:00 p.m., they reached Echo Well and found the descent ropes correctly installed, indicating the group had passed through without problems. However, beyond the cathedral, they found no trace of the missing explorers. The next morning, March 16th, the Civil Guard mobilized a special mountain rescue unit. 20 specialized agents, accompanied by volunteer spelunkers from all over Asturias, systematically combed every known gallery of the cave. The search dogs, 2 German shepherds specifically trained for cave rescues, were introduced but became disoriented and anxious, constantly barking toward the west of the cavern without finding a clear trail. The handler, Santiago Menendez, later stated he'd never seen his dogs behave so erratically. The technology available in 1994 was limited compared to today's standards. There was no underground GPS. Cell phones had no coverage in the mountains. Imagine trying to get signal in the middle of Yellowstone. And radio communication equipment had very limited range underground. Rescuers depended on hand-drawn maps, compasses, and their own knowledge of the terrain. The portable ground-penetrating radar they brought from Madrid on March 18th was primitive and barely penetrated a few feet into solid rock. The first false lead came on March 19th, when a shepherd reported seeing 3 people matching the descriptions exiting a different cave about 3 miles away. An entire team was diverted to investigate, only to discover it was another group of spelunkers who happened to be wearing similar colors. The second false lead was even more frustrating. On March 22nd, a piece of red fabric was found in a nearby sinkhole. Michael's parents initially identified it as part of his North Face vest, but later analysis showed it was a different brand and had been there for years. The third and most controversial false lead involved a witness, José Manuel Fernández, who claimed to have seen the 3 explorers on March 17th in a bar in Cangas de Onís. He gave detailed descriptions and seemed very certain. Police lost 3 valuable days investigating this lead, until José Manuel admitted he'd been drinking heavily that night and had probably confused them with other customers. On March 25th, after 10 days of intensive searching, rescue teams had explored over 9 miles of underground galleries without finding any significant trace. Frustration was palpable. Specialized divers brought from Barcelona explored all known lakes and siphons in the cave without result. 3 underground lakes were completely drained. They even used an experimental underwater robot borrowed from Madrid Polytechnic University, but the batteries lasted barely 30 minutes and image quality was extremely poor. The official investigation was suspended on April 15, 1994, exactly 1 month after the disappearance. The Civil Guard's final report, signed by Lieutenant Colonel Ricardo Morales, concluded, After exhaustive search efforts employing all available resources, no evidence has been found of the whereabouts of the three missing persons. The most probable hypothesis is they suffered an accident in an unexplored area of the cave, possibly a collapse or fall into an unmapped siphon. We recommend provisional case closure. The families didn't accept this conclusion. Karen's parents hired a private detective, Andrew Ruiz, who spent 3 months investigating. Ruiz discovered there had been tensions in the speleological club about who should lead the expedition, and that another member, Robert Diaz, had expressed annoyance at not being included. However, Robert had a solid alibi. He was at a spelunking conference in France with hundreds of witnesses. The case was officially archived on March 15, 1995, exactly 1 year after the disappearance. What do you think really happened? Did the police overlook something obvious? Leave your theory in the comments while I continue with the years of anguish that followed. And if this story is hitting you hard, hit that like button so more people can learn about this case. The first anniversary of the disappearance, March 15, 1995, marked the beginning of a painful tradition. The three families gathered at the Cave of Silence entrance at dawn, each carrying white candles and photographs of their loved ones. Maria, Michael's mother, placed his yellow helmet at the cave entrance, the same one Teresa had given him years before, and that had been found by a hiker, though this turned out to be another similar helmet. Karen's parents brought a bouquet of white lilies, her favorite flowers, and left them on a flat rock that Karen had photographed on her last documented excursion. Elena, David's wife, brought Paul, now 2.5 years old, who left a drawing he'd made of his father. During 1996 and 1997, persistent rumors emerged within the spelunking community. A group of French explorers reported finding an old backpack in a connected cave 12 miles away, but when they went to retrieve it, they couldn't find the passage again. A forest ranger swore he'd seen strange lights coming from cracks in the mountain during full moon nights, feeding supernatural theories that the families found deeply hurtful. In 1998, Michael's younger brother Charles began showing signs of severe emotional deterioration. He dedicated every weekend for 4 years to searching for his brother, exploring every cave and sinkhole within a 30-mile radius. His wife, Martha, found him one day in their basement, with topographic maps covering every inch of the walls, connected with red threads like a police investigation board. Charles had spent their savings on spelunking equipment and had lost his job due to constant absences. He was hospitalized for nervous exhaustion in September 1998 and spent 3 months in psychiatric treatment. The year 2000 brought false hope when improved ground-penetrating radar technology allowed a new scan of the cave. A team from Madrid's Complutense University detected what appeared to be unmapped cavities behind the cathedral's west wall. For 3 weeks in July, a team of specialists attempted to access these cavities, but the rock was too hard and the risk of collapse too high. The operation was abandoned after a small controlled explosion caused the partial collapse of an adjacent gallery. In 2003, Karen would have turned 33. Her parents, Anthony and Rose, organized a memorial mass at Oviedo Cathedral. During the homily, Rose broke down, screaming that she could feel her daughter was still alive, trapped somewhere, waiting to be rescued. It was a heartbreaking moment etched in the memory of everyone present. Anthony was never the same after that day, falling into a deep depression from which he never fully recovered. 2007 marked a tragic turning point. Maria, Michael's mother, passed away on November 3rd after a long battle with cancer. On her deathbed, she made Charles promise never to stop looking for his brother. Her last words, according to Charles, were, "Tell Michael I'll wait for him on the other side." Her funeral brought together hundreds of people, including Karen's and David's families, in a moment of shared grief that temporarily renewed media interest in the case. Between 2008 and 2009, the economic crisis hit Spain hard. Imagine the 2008 US housing crisis, but worse, and resources for cold cases were drastically reduced. On March 15, 2009, exactly 15 years after the disappearance, the Civil Guard officially closed the case, classifying it as disappearance with presumed accidental death. The families protested, but their voices were barely heard amid the national crisis. Elena, David's widow, had rebuilt her life and remarried in 2005, but continued visiting the cave every anniversary with Paul, now a 16-year-old teenager who barely remembered his father. The following years, from 2010 to 2020, were a period of silent resignation. The annual visits continued, but with fewer people each time. Karen's parents, now in their 80s, could barely make the trip. Charles had found some peace after years of therapy, but still maintained a website dedicated to searching for his brother. Paul, David's son, now an adult studying geology like his father, began actively taking interest in the case, studying all available reports and maps. In 2019, the 25th anniversary of the disappearance briefly attracted the attention of a Netflix documentarian considering making a series about the case. But the project was cancelled when the COVID-19 pandemic hit in 2020. It seemed the mystery of the Cave of Silence was destined to remain unsolved forever. On November 1, 2021, a team of 5 geologists from the University of Oviedo arrived at the Cave of Silence with a completely different purpose than any previous expedition. Led by Dr. Isabel Martinez, a specialist in karst geomorphology, their mission was to create the first complete 3D map of the cave using state-of-the-art LIDAR, light detection and ranging technology. The project, funded by the European Union, aimed to study the effects of climate change on Cantabrian cave systems. The team included Roberto Ferreira, LIDAR operator, Ana Sanchez, doctoral student, Pedro Gomez, technical spelunker, and David Lopez, Geographic Information Systems specialist. For 3 days, they worked methodically, scanning every inch of the known galleries. The LIDAR, mounted on a special tripod, emitted millions of laser pulses per second, creating a 3-dimensional point cloud with millimeter precision. On November 4th, at 2:32 p.m., while scanning the cathedral's west wall, Roberto noticed something unusual in the data. The laser was detecting a void behind what appeared to be solid rock. "Dr. Martinez," he called, "I think there's a cavity here that's not on any map." Detailed analysis revealed there was a layer of flowstone, rock formed by mineral deposits, barely 6 inches thick, that had completely sealed an opening. The mineral deposits suggested this sealing had occurred gradually over approximately 25 to 30 years. Pedro Gomez, with 20 years of spelunking experience, carefully examined the wall. Using a geologist's hammer, he gently tapped different points until he found a section that sounded hollow. With extreme care, they began removing the flowstone. At 3:45 p.m., after an hour of delicate work, they managed to create an opening the size of a soccer ball. Pedro introduced an endoscopic camera, and what he saw left him breathless. There's equipment here," he whispered. On the monitor screen, everyone could clearly see an oxidized flashlight hanging from what appeared to be a backpack. David Lopez immediately recognized the significance. "Oh my God, could these be the missing explorers from 1994? Dr. Martinez made the decision to stop all work and immediately contact authorities. At 4:30 p.m., the Civil Guard arrived at the site, accompanied by a forensic team. Working with extreme caution to preserve any evidence, they carefully enlarged the opening over the next 4 hours. At 8:47 p.m., Pedro Gomez was the first to enter the sealed cavity, secured with ropes and transmitting live video to the surface. What he found exceeded his worst fears. The cavity was a chamber approximately 33 feet long by 20 feet wide, with a low ceiling of barely 6.5 feet. In the center, 3 sets of skeletal remains lay in positions suggesting their final moments. The equipment was remarkably well preserved due to the dry, sealed environment. The oxidized flashlight they'd seen first was a black Petzl Duo, modified with additional components, clearly David's. Nearby was a bright yellow helmet, though discolored by time, and a hot pink helmet. But the most shocking discovery was the Nikon FM2 camera in its hermetic bag, found next to the remains later identified as Karen's. The bag had perfectly protected the camera and the film roll inside. On the north wall of the cavity, carved with what appeared to be a knife, were barely legible words. The irregular handwriting suggested they were written under extreme conditions. What they found was more horrible than anyone could have imagined. Besides the remains and equipment, there was evidence the three had survived for days after becoming trapped. Empty food cans, excavation attempts at different points on the walls, and most heartbreaking, a notebook with torn pages that had apparently been burned to provide light when the flashlight batteries died. The forensic team worked through the night, meticulously documenting every detail of the scene before beginning the delicate task of recovering the remains. The 21st century forensic investigation began on November 5, 2021, at the Oviedo Institute of Legal Medicine. Dr. Carmen Ruiz, a forensic pathologist with 25 years of experience, led the team charged with analyzing the skeletal remains. Using high-resolution computed tomography and stable isotope analysis, they could determine not only each individual's identity, but also reconstruct their final days with surprising detail. The mitochondrial DNA analysis, completed on November 10th, confirmed the identities beyond doubt. The remains corresponded to Michael Rodriguez, Karen Mitchell, and David Henderson. The comparison with dental records provided by the families in 1994 matched perfectly. A touching detail was Michael's Casio watch, still on his wrist, stopped at 3:47, though it couldn't be determined whether it was AM or PM, nor the exact day. The inscription on the back, "To my love, Mr. Teresa, 1993, was the final confirmation his family needed. The ultra-high-resolution 3D scan of the entire cavity, combined with computerized fluid dynamic simulations, revealed exactly what had happened. The three explorers had entered the cavity through a narrow passage that had collapsed behind them, probably triggered by their combined weight, combined with structural weakness in the rock. Geological analysis showed the area had experienced minor seismic activity on March 15, 1994, recorded by seismographs 125 miles away, but not considered significant at the time. The reconstruction of the route they took was possible thanks to the chalk marks they'd left, which, in the sealed environment, remained visible. They'd explored the new cavity for approximately 2 hours before the collapse. Analysis of fracture patterns in the collapsed rocks indicated it had occurred suddenly, without warning, completely sealing the only known exit. Toxicological analysis of the remains revealed elevated CO2 levels in the bones, indicating they'd suffered from hypercapnia, carbon dioxide poisoning, in addition to hypothermia. The temperature in the sealed cavity was a constant 46 degrees Fahrenheit, and without ventilation, the CO2 from their own breathing would have accumulated dangerously. It was estimated they would have experienced disorientation and hallucinations in their final hours. The recovered notebook, though damaged, was subjected to multispectral analysis at the National Police's Document Analysis Laboratory in Madrid. Using infrared and ultraviolet light, they could recover text invisible to the naked eye. David had meticulously documented their situation. Day 1 after collapse. We're trapped but calm. We have food for 4 days, trying to dig out. The entries became progressively more erratic. Day 3, Karen very weak. Michael won't stop digging. My hands are bleeding. The last legible entry was chilling. I'm sorry, Elena. Take care of Paul. Tell him his father loved him. Karen's camera provided the most impactful visual evidence. The digital development of the film roll, performed by Kodak in Rochester, New York, showed 36 photographs. The first 30 documented their normal exploration, full of wonder and joy. Photos 31 to 35 showed the cavity where they'd become trapped, including an image of the passage they'd entered through, perfectly passable. Photo 36, the last one, taken with flash in total darkness, indeed showed a bloodied hand. Forensic analysis determined it was David's hand, and he'd been carving a message into the wall with his Victorinox knife. The message carved into the wall, analyzed with laser scanning and RTI, reflectance transformation imaging photography, read, Michael Rodriguez, Karen Mitchell, David Henderson, March 1994. Collapse. No exit. Families, we love you. Nobody's fault. But there was more. Below, with weaker strokes barely visible even with modern technology, was another line. Robert followed us. This last discovery completely changed the nature of the investigation. Robert Diaz, the club member supposedly in France during the expedition, suddenly became a person of interest. On November 20th, 2021, investigators reviewed the records from the 1994 Lyon Spelunking Conference. Indeed, Robert had been registered and had presented a paper on March 16th, but a crucial detail had been overlooked. His presentation was scheduled for 2 p.m., and hotel records showed he'd checked out at 5 a.m. on March 15th, enough time to drive to Asturias. The investigation took a dramatic turn on November 22, 2021, when Chief Inspector Alejandro Torres of the Civil Guard's Central Operational Unit ordered digital forensic analysis of all photographs from the 1994 Lyon Conference. Using retrospective facial recognition software, they discovered Robert Diaz appeared in only 2 photographs, one taken on March 14th during the welcome dinner and another on March 16th during his presentation. There was no visual record of him on March 15th, the day of the disappearance. The investigation team delved into the Asturian Speleological Club archives. The meeting minutes, digitized in 2010 but never thoroughly reviewed, revealed significant tensions. In a meeting on March 2, 1994, Robert had proposed leading the expedition to the Cave of Silence. The motion was rejected 7 votes to 3, designating David as leader. Robert had stormed out of the meeting, according to the secretary's notes, shouting, "This won't stand. That cave should be mine." On November 25th, investigators located Robert Diaz, now 68 years old, living in a nursing home in Gijón. Imagine a facility like those in Florida where many retirees end up. He'd completely abandoned spelunking in 1995 and had worked as an accountant until retirement. When investigators arrived, they found him in his room, staring fixedly at a framed photograph of himself in his youth, dressed in spelunking gear. The initial interview was cordial. Robert expressed shock and sadness at the discovery of the bodies. But when Inspector Torres casually mentioned the message carved on the wall, "Robert followed us," his behavior changed drastically. His face paled, his hands began trembling, and he asked for water. After a long silence, he asked, "Can I speak with a lawyer?" During the next 48 hours, while Robert consulted with his legal representation, investigators made a crucial discovery. In David's personal archive, his widow Eleanor had preserved all his spelunking belongings. Among them, they found a small notebook with notes about different club members. The entry about Robert was revealing. R.D. Competitive to the point of sickness. Followed me on 3 expeditions without invitation. Obsessed with making the first important discovery. Be careful. On November 28th, Robert Diaz, accompanied by his lawyer, made a full confession at the Oviedo Civil Guard Command. The transcript of his confession fills 47 pages, but the key points are chilling in their premeditation and cruelty. Robert admitted he'd lied about being in Lyon on March 15th. He'd driven all night from France, arriving in Asturias at 11 a.m. And knowing the group's habits and plans, he'd overheard their conversations at the club. He followed them to the cave, keeping his distance. He waited until they entered the fissure toward the new cavity. His original plan, he confessed, was simply to seal the entrance with rocks to scare them, forcing them to find another exit, humiliating them, and proving they weren't prepared to lead important expeditions. "I never wanted them to die," Robert sobbed during his confession. "I just wanted them to be scared, to call for help, to admit they needed someone with more experience. I would have rescued them after a few hours and been the hero." But the plan went terribly wrong. Robert had placed small charges of plastic explosive, stolen from a quarry where he'd briefly worked, at strategic points in the fissure. The idea was to cause a controlled collapse that could be removed later. However, he grossly underestimated the rock's instability. The explosion caused a massive collapse that not only sealed the entrance, but displaced tons of rock. Robert waited in the cave for 6 hours, desperately trying to remove the rocks. But it was impossible. He heard screams at first, then rhythmic pounding that lasted hours, and finally silence. Terrified and panicking, he fled back to France, arriving just in time for his March 16th presentation. For 27 years, he'd lived with the guilt, developing chronic insomnia, severe depression, and attempting suicide twice, in 2001 and 2009. The most disturbing part of his confession was when he admitted he'd actively participated in the initial search, deliberately directing rescue teams away from the collapse zone. He'd been the one to suggest searching in the connected caves to the east, knowing the bodies were to the west. He'd consoled the families, attended memorial masses, cried with them, all while knowing exactly where their loved ones were. What you're about to discover is more disturbing than you can imagine. If you think you can handle it, keep watching. And remember to subscribe if you haven't already. Forensic analysis of the crime scene, with knowledge of Robert's confession, revealed additional chilling details. The excavation patterns on the walls showed the three had desperately tried to escape for days. They'd used every available tool, including their helmets, until their hands were destroyed. Karen had written with her blood on her backpack, "Mom, Dad, I love you. I'm not afraid." Michael had carved with a rock on the floor, "Teresa, be happy." The marks showed they'd worked in shifts, trying to maintain hope until the end. Investigators also discovered Robert had returned to the crime scene at least 3 times over the years. In 1999, 2004, and 2010, he'd entered the cave alone, approaching the sealed wall. In his confession, he admitted he talked to them, asking for forgiveness, but never had the courage to confess or attempt to open the cavity. In 2010, he noticed flowstone had begun forming, naturally sealing his crime, and felt a twisted relief that nature was hiding his sin. The trial against Robert Diaz began on March 15, 2023, exactly 29 years after the events. The Oviedo Provincial Court was packed. The victims' families, now aged but finally with answers, occupied the front rows. Paul Henderson, David's son, now 30 years old, and a geologist like his father, testified about growing up without a father and the devastating impact on his family. The sentence, issued on May 3, 2023, was 28 years in prison for triple homicide with aggravating circumstances of cruelty and concealment of evidence. Given Robert's age, 70 at the time of sentencing, he would effectively spend the rest of his life in prison. During the reading of the sentence, Robert remained silent, his gaze lost. His only statement was, "I don't ask for forgiveness because I know it's unforgivable. I only hope my confession has given them some peace." The most emotional moment came when Rose Mitchell, Karen's mother, now 89 years old, confronted Robert at the final hearing. With a trembling but firm voice, she said, "For 29 years, I imagined thousands of scenarios. None was as cruel as the truth. You didn't just steal their lives, you stole 3 decades of peace from us, but now I know where my baby is, and I can finally say goodbye. On March 17, 2023, a joint funeral was held at Oviedo Cathedral. The remains of Michael Rodriguez, Karen Mitchell, and David Henderson were finally buried in San Salvador Cemetery. Over 1,000 people attended, including spelunkers from across Europe. The Cave of Silence was officially closed to the public and declared a memorial. A bronze plaque at the entrance now reads, "In memory of Michael Rodriguez, Karen Mitchell, and David Henderson. May their passion for exploration inspire and their tragedy teach." 1994-2021. Finally home. LIDAR, the Asturian Speleological Club, established the MKD protocol, Michael, Karen, David, for safety, requiring multiple identified exit points, GPS beacons, and satellite communication for all expeditions. LIDAR technology is now routinely used to map caves before human exploration. Paul Henderson established a foundation in his father's name to provide free safety equipment to young spelunkers. The story of the Cave of Silence serves as a somber reminder. The dangers in spelunking don't always come from nature. It also illustrates how modern technology can finally provide answers to old mysteries, and how truth, however painful, is necessary for closure and healing. If you made it this far, it's because this story touched you deeply. Subscribe to the channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss the next case. Comment what case you'd like me to investigate next. Do you know any unsolved cases in your country? Leave them in the comments. Hit that like button if you want more stories like this, and share this video with someone who appreciates well-researched true crime. See you in the next case.